My bucolic life, we have 3 cities stripe. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
All right. Hello. This is going to be a little bit different. It is getting to be summer here, and I have my inflatable tub pool set up on the porch, and I want a new bathing suit. And I'm going to try this. It's a Vogue pattern. It's a retro original 1960 design Vogue pattern. I think that this is going to be fun. I have never done one of these retro swimsuits. They are not made with any spandex, with any elastic or anything like that. It's all of a woven cotton, all right? Actually, they suggest that you use denim or gingham or broadcloth and those types of things for the swimsuit, okay? So, very different. What I'm going to be using, I have enough left over from that pink tucked dress of this that I'm going to use this with a plain white broadcloth lining for my bathing suit. And for the cover up, I have a lot of this very lightweight cotton voile type fabric. Okay, so that's going to be the cover up. So it's going to be a very pink thing. So this is not serious at all. We're just going to try to have fun with it. And right now I'm looking at the pattern and I have no idea how they are going to size this. I'm assuming that they are going to have like 0 ease worked into it. So I'm going to actually cut my patterns out a size larger. And my goal is that once I make it once and it fits, then I can just keep using that pattern. So anyhow, let's get started. Okay, so here's my first little thing I want to say. The cover-up sleeve pattern is actually a fairly straight sleeve. And I want mine wider because if I cut out the size that I'm using for everything else, I'm only going to have about 1.5 inches of ease in that upper arm, which is not fun when it's a cover-up. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the largest size, which should give me about 3 inches of ease, and that's more along my liking for this. So just be aware when you're cutting it out, measure your sleeve, and see what you come up with. But I wanted to show you one alteration that I'm going to be doing because I did cut out a wider sleeve than the other parts that I did. So I need to adapt this sleeve head to fit into my top. So here's the thing with the sleeve. If it has gathers in the front, all right, their design does not have gathers on the top. It's just like an eased in sleeve head. But if you don't want to do all of this stuff, you'll just have some gathers on the top and it'll blend in with everything else. So the theory will carry through and that will be just fine. But just so I can try to keep in the same spirit as what they have in the Vogue pattern, what I needed to do is reduce the amount of space I have up here. Say my armhole in my bodice is this size, and when I cut out a bigger size sleeve, that's going to need a bigger place. So what I need to do is reduce the size of the sleeve while keeping the width that I want, which means this is a very tall top here, and I should be able to reduce it by cutting it down some. What I'm going to do is I need to measure the length at my seam line for my size 16, which is what everything else is cut out as. And then I'm going to measure it for the size 22, which is what this is cut out as. Figure out the difference, and then adjust my pattern based on that difference. Okay, so the size 16 is 22 3/4. The size 22 is 25 1/4. So that means I have a difference of 1.5 inches, which isn't a whole lot. Okay, I want to make that adjustment above this notch and above this notch. Okay, so I'm going to say right about here. I'm going to go ahead and make a line a couple inches above that notch and a couple inches above this one. And what I need to do is measure the length just between those two notches. Okay, so just very roughly, I'm just measuring this outside edge, just lining up between the little line I drew there and the line I drew here. And what I have is just over 15 inches. So I need to take that down to 13.5 inches, okay? So let's say I put my 13.5 here. That's going to give me a rough idea of the size that I need to have this sleeve cap in. So now you can adjust it or something like that. Flexible rulers come in handy for things like this, but not everybody has one. So what I can do is, making sure that this side is staying here and this side, my 13.5, is over here. I'm just going to put a couple little dots where I need to make my new cutting line. And because there is some easing involved, there's these dots up here where there is some easing involved, it's okay if it's just not, exact to the 1/16 of an inch. But this is just going to give us enough of a trim to make it match up really easily. So I hope that wasn't too confusing, but that's just another way of adjusting your sleeves. Okay, so now I can just get rid of that top part, and when I'm going to be marking for easing, I can actually go back down and pick one of the smaller size marks, just picking one that's about 5/8 in, ones that's going to correspond with that placement, and that will be fine. And then this can all just match up with my armhole. One more little thing here I wanted to show you is I am going to lengthen my cover up by about 4 inches. My thighs just aren't that cute, so why parade that in front of everybody? So what I'm going to do is just, I'm not messing with anything here, but as I mark, or as I cut, I'll just be moving my little seam marker and cut all the way across like that. But I am adding 4 inches to the bottom. That shouldn't impact anything else. But let me go ahead and pin this. And a couple people were asking me to show how I lay out and cut out. And honestly, it's different for every project. But in general, I use pins, and I use a lot of pins. And my thinking is, one, I want the paper to stay attached to my fabric after I'm done. And a lot of times if you just use weights to hold things and cut around it, well, then they separate. And then when you have to go back to mark it, you have to reassemble it, make sure everything's all matching together. Whereas if I just pin it in the first place and I leave it pinned, then it's easier for me to come back, punch my circles, transfer my markings, and everything's good that way. So, okay, and this is the last piece, which is the pocket. And this is a very, very thin fabric, and this is a very, very thick pocket. So I'm debating with maybe lining it or interfacing it or something to give it a little more strength. But I also want to mention that just like everything, when I have a cotton natural fiber, I make sure that before I start cutting anything out, it has been washed in hot water, full cycle, and it has been dried in hot temperature, full cycle, just to make sure I get all of the shrinkage and sizing out of my fabric that I'm going to be able to before I start cutting into it. So I did decide that I am going to line the pockets. I think it's just going to give it more strength. So I'm cutting out 2 more pieces in just a white cotton blendish type fabric here. So okay, so the first thing we're going to work on is the pocket. Now in the instructions, they're going to have you do it a little bit differently. They just want you to fold down the top edge, fold it down again, sew it, flip it, push in the sides and hem it. Okay, I'm going to do it a little differently, namely because this fabric is so thin, and if this is a beach cover-up, I'll probably be throwing my phone or whatever in there. So I need to make it a little more substantial. I'm actually going to be reinforcing this part up here below the fold line so that it has a little bit of substance to it. And what I'm going to be using is, this is actually a waistband interfacing, but it's white, so it should work pretty well. And I'm just going to cut it in half and use half of it for each pocket. So I'm going to be fusing my interfacing to my pocket, and I'm putting it right at the edge. This part here, that's for a fold, so that's actually going to end up in a seam allowance, so that's fine. But I'm going to go ahead and fuse my interfacings to my pocket tops. Okay, so now this is fused on, and I'm going to be putting my pocket lining, which I cut the exact same size, up here at the top. Pin that on so it's nice and even, and I'm going to be sewing it actually in the ditch where this fold is here, which is about 3/8 inch in. You know, if you're just using a regular interfacing, you can use whatever, 1/4 inch, 3/8, it's up to you. But I'm going to try to make sure I sew this in this ditch because that's going to make it a lot flatter. But actually, I almost forgot something. I'm going to be leaving it open about maybe a little over 1 inch wide in the middle. So I'm going to sew from here to here and here to here, but I'm leaving it open in the middle, you know, give or take 1.5 inches. Basically, it's going to be open enough that you're going to be able to shove everything in there and pull it inside out. Alrighty, so here's my pocket piece. I've sewn this, leaving my gap open. So what I am going to do now is fold it up so that the edge of my interfacing is at the very top. Just kind of smooth it down. And while I have it up like that, I want to open up this seam allowance and just kind of look at my thumbnail, push it open like that. So it's going to want to kind of stay open for me, okay? Now, flipping it over onto this side, making sure those seam allowances are still open. I'm going to kind of smooth it over. This pink fabric is a little lightweight, so we have to guide it. All right, good, good. Now, what I'm going to be doing is sewing down, over, and back up, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and actually here, because this whole thing, my pink wants to get wonky, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw a straight line where it would be good for a sewing line, just so I don't end up with a crooked piece. That looks pretty good to me. Okay. All right, so that's going to be my bottom, but I'm basically going to come down, over, and back up there. So I'm going to pin this bottom corners here just to make sure it doesn't want to move. Okay, so with this sewn, now I need to come and trim around it. And I'm going to trim it about 1/4 inch in, and I am using my pinking shears. You could probably do this just as well with straight shears if you wanted to. So now, remember we have this opening here. I need to carefully shove everything through that hole. Right, so now I'm just going to use my little metal chopstick with the rounded end. Just try to work these corners out. And since this is a bathing suit cover-up and not a tailored garment, I'm not really overly worried about my corners. but because I did trim them with the pinking shears, there's not a lot of bulk in that area anyway, so I should end up with nice looking corners. So when I go to press this now, I want to press it making sure that these seam allowances are staying, where they're supposed to. And as I press it, I'm going to kind of try to guide the fabric. See here. I'm going to try to guide the fabric so that my lining is slightly to the inside and so that the outside edge is slightly exposed, okay? Kind of like the effect you get from understitching, but I'm not understitching. So if I do that and I end up with like a little extra fabric and bubbliness in the middle, what I do is I hold my steam iron over it and very carefully pat it all down. And usually that steam from the steam iron, don't stick your hand under it while you have the steam iron. Take the steam iron away and pat it, all right? That caveat. But usually that will want to shrink some of those fibers in so it'll lay nice and flat. This is the other pocket. I've already done it and I've ironed it, and you can kind of see what I mean. And it's just so that from this side, it's not obvious that there's a lining peeking out. So then, once I have it all pressed, what I need to do is come back with the needle and thread and just whip stitch that little opening closed. And this is how I'm stitching it closed. It's not the most beautiful, but I can stick it down here, bring it up on the pink side, bring it over onto the white side, and back up. And it makes it, fairly invisible. I have a couple little pricks showing, but that's not that bad. Okay, so this is my front, and I need to mark these 2 circles, which is my pocket placement. And I will also clip my notches all the way around. So for my circles, I put my little scrap of leather there and punch the hole for my size, which is going to be this one over here. So I'm just going to push that straight down to punch out that hole, move it over and do the same thing over here. That gets those little circles out. And I can come back with my heat erasable pen, mark it in, and I will do that same thing on both sides. Okay, so now I am going to place my pocket. So I have my 2 little dots right here. I'm going to put the top corners of my pocket where those 2 dots are. Looks like it's a little bit of an angle. That's interesting. Let me put the one over here just to make sure I don't have anything marked wrong. And yep, it looks like they are placed somewhat at an angle. I'm thinking because this is such a full wide piece that when it comes back down together, they'll look like they're flat. So I'm going to go ahead and pin them, and I will be sewing them on, top stitching them on just very close to the edge all the way around. Now when I get up to the top, reinforce it a little bit because that's where all the strain is going to be. So my front pockets are sewn on, and now I'm going to place the back over it. Now, usually I like to serge around my pieces before I sew them. I am making the exception to that usually right now because this fabric is so thin. And again, the type of fabric and the type of project is basically what determines why I do things. And because, one, this fabric, and that it's a bathing suit cover-up, so if my seams are not exactly pressed the exact way that, sewing etiquette, propriety, whatever says they should be, it's not that much of a big deal. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this at 5/8 and then come back and serge the sides. All right, I'm dealing with both sides. And then I'm going to come back and serge all the way around the bottom piece. Well, the bottom where the hem will be. Okay, and at this point, I have my sides sewn and serged. And when I'm serging around, I make sure that my seam allowances on both sides are pressed towards the back. And I want to make sure that up here at the top of that seam, they are also going towards the back. So what I'm going to be doing now is coming back and serging around the whole top, you know, and up and down the sleeve, but making sure, you know, that's towards the back. And I want to serge on the top, even though this is going to be hidden inside of the facing. There's going to be a lot of gathering here, and this stuff frays so easily. If I don't have that serging on it right now, it's just going to make a mess for me. Okay, so with the serging done, what I need to do now is run 2 rows of gathering stitches across the top of both the front and the back, and make sure you have your good seam allowance with no stitches in it on both sides, so that there's, you know, at least that chunk, because you need that much so that you can have a seam allowance for your sleeve to be sewn on. Alright, so I need to cut out the interfacing to go on these yokes. There's 2 of each, you know, and I'm going to be using this. It's a very lightweight interfacing because my fabric is very lightweight. So that's what it is. It's very inexpensive, but for a very lightweight fabric, it's what I want. Alrighty, so I am just gently placing my fusible interfacing on top of my piece here. And I want to make sure I don't burn this. This very lightweight interfacing, if your iron is too hot or something, it can just go, you know, and make a mess really quickly. So I am going to actually use a press cloth on this one, and I'm going to moisten it because I want plenty of steam. Ignore the cat hair. I'm going to spray it down with my little spray bottle here because I want a lot of steam. And I am using a steam iron, but you know, so much the better. I'm just pressing straight down. Okay. So let's see what this looks like here. It looks like we have a decent bond. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and also iron it on this side again, misting my press cloth. I think I need to refill my bottle here. Just so I make sure that I have the press cloth as protection so that I'm not going to burn up my interfacing, but it's also giving me the opportunity to press fairly hard with a fairly high heat on my iron. Okay. So I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to set this one aside and do the same. This is a front piece, and I'll do the same thing for the back pieces. Good morning. It is the next day here, and I am working on getting the facing put together to put onto my garment. So on this particular pattern, they want you to make the piece of the facing that has no interfacing as the public one, and they want you to put the interfaced one as your private one. So it seems like they switched that around a whole lot. It just depends on the designer and what they want. So no set standard. So what I'm doing is I'm going ahead and marking my notches and my circles. This is for sleeve placement. This one up here is actually a triangle. Triangles mark shoulder tops, so that's where my shoulder seam is going to be. And so I'm just going to go ahead and mark all of the pieces. So there's a facing that is interfaced for the front and the back, and a facing that is not interfaced for the front and the back. And one other marking before I take these away, because the front and back facing look almost identical, I am putting a tiny letter B for back in the seam allowance part up here on my back pieces, just so once this is separated from them, I still know who is who. Okay, so I ran across something here I want to show you. This is the back, and this is my front, okay? So they have an odd thing here where the front top of the yoke, the seam line area up here on the yoke, is actually a lot wider than the back. So I looked in the instructions and they don't mention anything about easing anything together or noting that one is wider than the other. And I am looking at their drawings and it looks like they're trying to make it so everything is flat up there. And I really don't see a purpose for working this much ease into the front of a facing shoulder. It's just odd. I'm thinking this is a typo. So I made sure, double check that my pieces were cut out at the same size, and they were. But you can see this peeks out about 5/8 of an inch wider. So I have to make an executive decision. Do I ease it in or do I trim it? And I'm going to trim it because I don't see how this is going to make any sense, having the front of a facing eased in on the shoulder on a garment like this. So just to show you, what I'm going to do is basically line these up the best I can, and I am going to trim all of this stuff here that is peeking out. I'm just going to trim all of this off so that they're going to match up at the top and then just ease it back down into the bottom. So I hope that's the right thing to do. You know, sometimes you just have to make a choice and go with it, and that is my choice. Okay, so I'm just going to put my piece with the interfacing on it away for a minute, get my front facing, and now I'm going to start attaching this to my garment. So I know which side is the back because of my letter B, and I know which side is the back here because it does not have pockets, thankfully. That would be odd. So this is my back. I'm just going to place this on here, match up my sides, match up my centers, and then just kind of ease in all the gathers all the way around for the back and the front. And my bobbin thread is a slightly lighter color of pink than my needle thread, so I know which one to pull. So I'm going to pull my bobbin thread, which pulls a whole lot smoother. And this, since this fabric is so lightweight and the distance I need to gather is not very far, I'm just using regular thread here. Alright, so I have my uninterfaced piece sewn on, and it's, you know, it's looking cute. Since it is sewn on, I'm looking at the inside here. These serge stitches above my gathers, they're not really necessary anymore, and the pattern calls for trimming this whole seam. I'm not going to be trimming this part. I don't want that to fray out or anything. It's very delicate, but I am going to come in here and trim off this serged edge, which is going to slightly grade this, and that's going to take some of the bulk out. It's going to keep this serged edge from showing, but at the same time I'm going to have two seam allowances, one from the front bodice, front facing, and one from the back facing. So there's still going to be a line there, but it won't be as bad. So I'm just going to trim off my serging all the way around. Alright, so now what I've done is pinned the facing piece that has the interfacing to the one that I just sewed on that has no interfacing, okay? And making sure that the one with the letter B matches, where is it? Where's my letter B? Here it is. That the one with the letter B matches the other one with the letter B, so, you know, both backs are on the right side. Now, when I go to sew this, I'm actually going to be looking at it this way, because if I'm looking, see, I can see right here, I've pinned that incorrectly. Because if I'm looking at it from this direction, I am seeing the outside version. This is the outside version. Even though it's inside out, this is the outside piece of fabric. And these little dots that I marked in the corners, those are like my goal lines. So I'm going to be basically making a seam, hang on a second, from this dot to this dot, okay? But by looking at it this way, if something wants to pucker, especially on a fabric this lightweight, if something wants to pucker, I can see it this way. But if I have it flipped over so that when I'm sewing it, I'm looking at this side, I can't see what's going on, and I can't fix it until after I'm done, and that's like, you know, ripping and resewing. But this way, nope, everything's good. So actually, if I wanted to, I could draw stitching lines all the way across. I think my pen's running out of ink, just fine. And just follow those. But again, just wanted to make sure that I showed you. I like to sew so I can see when I'm sewing what the outside piece of fabric is going to be. So now I'm going to trim almost to those stitching lines very, very closely. And I've actually made my stitches fairly close together, just so that it would be really secure here. So we actually need to understitch this now. So like say once I have all of my corners cut, what I'm going to need to do is open this up and like this, okay? And the seam allowances always get pressed when you're understitching. The seam allowances get pressed towards the private side, and on this garment it's the interfaced one, okay? And then stitched about 1/8 of an inch in on this side of it all the way down. Now, just because it's me, I'm actually going to come in and I'm going to trim this interfaced part to about half of that width. That's a pretty wide seam allowance, just to grade it a little bit. But that's not going to make any difference when I'm understitching. I'm still pressing the whole thing this way and understitching it down here. Okay, so I have my understitching done, and you can see right here, that's what it looks like. And what that does is, so this is the outside, you don't see any folds or seams or anything up here, it just has a nice curved edge. It all wraps towards the private side. So what I need to do now is come back and slip stitch the other part of the facing down. So let me open it up here. Okay. So the pattern instructions called for pressing this under ahead of time. I don't do that. It just always makes trouble for me. So I'm going to just go ahead and fold it over and pin it as it is. Once I have it pinned all the way across, and I pin it so I don't see that stitching, but it's basically right on top of it, okay? So I'm going to go pin those both straight across. So now that I have my facing, hand stitched on the inside, I'm going to come back, and you can see the bottom of my armhole is serged, this part, but I need to come back and serge these. And I've just roughly basted them together, and you can see one side is pooching out a little more than the other from all this kind of stuff, and the fact that this fabric is very stretchy in its own, nonconformist voile kind of way. So it'll even all of that out and make a nice armhole. So I'm going to go ahead and do those, put this on the dress form, and see what we have so far. So I have a very, very dark gray bra on my dress form, and you can see that. I wanted to see how opaque this was going to be. I knew it wasn't going to be terribly. And that's fine. What I like is that it kind of obscures the outline of the body, which is, what I'm going for here. And here's my big pockets, and they look a lot more secure since the bottom part of them is lined than if they weren't, because this fabric is very thin. I did add the 4 inches to the bottom, and I think that's going to be really good to hide my thighs. And yeah, it's cute. Up here, I really want to put something decorative right here. I'll hold off until later, but to me, this is just calling for something fun. So anyway, now it's time to go ahead and start working on the sleeves. Okay, so now I've got my sleeve piece out here, my slightly modified sleeve piece. But the process is the same whether if you modified it or not, which is mark your circles for your sleeve top and the 2 sides where we ease. And then also, I am going to, because the sleeve piece looks very, very similar, the front and the back, put a letter B on the outside of these pieces, and that way I make sure I have one of each when I'm looking at them. So like I said, I'm just drawing the hash marks for my notches because I don't want to clip into this. It frays enough already. So the first thing I'm going to do is serge around the entire piece. Nope, forget I said that. The first thing I am going to do is serge around the very top of this, of both of the pieces. Then after I have this serged, I'm going to come back and sew this seam together and then serge both of those sides together. And again, that's just because this fabric is so light and so prone to fraying that I think that that's a good thing to do. All right, so this is where I stand on the sleeves, and you can see on both of the sleeves the letter B that I wrote is on the outside. That way I can make sure that they're two opposite sleeves, that I didn't fold one of these inside out by accident. Okay, just another way to make sure everything's all right. So these sleeve heads need to get set in, and so instead of writing gathering stitches, since this fabric is so light, I am going to do the finger crimping on my sewing machine just to add some easing in up here. So let me show you what I mean by that. Alright, so first I'm making sure that my sewing machine stitch length is moderate. It's a little bit shorter than a gathering stitch, but not a whole lot. And I'm starting at the outside dot. I'm going to go all the way through to the third dot. What I do is put one finger behind my presser foot and just push up against the presser foot and down because I want to create a bunch of bulk back here. Okay, that's the very top. So when I let it go, you can see I have a whole bunch of little crimps going on here. That's going to work in all the fullness I need to set in a sleeve cap. I'm ready to start pinning my sleeve in. And first of all, I can still see my letter B for back. And that helps me because my dress is inside out. My sleeve is right side out. Okay? But I can tell easily which is the back of my dress, you know, no pockets. Okay? Plus my seam allowance is pressed towards the back. So I want to make sure my back of my sleeve is over here. And I can tell, again, this is right side out, but the B is on this side, so this side is back, so I can make sure it goes over here, just like that. Now, I am actually going to be pressing the seam allowance for the sleeve forward. So I have, at this intersection here, one going back and one going forward, and that'll make it a little more of a uniform thickness coming across here. Okay, so I've got it all in here and matched, and I actually ended up with a little bit extra ease here, but I'm not going to worry about that. That happens sometimes. It could be because of my fabric, it could be something with the alteration I made, who knows. But the way that I'm going to sew this in is with this part on top, this part down near the feed dogs. And so as I sew it, the feed dogs are going to ease in any extra fullness that I have underneath there, and it's all going to work out. So if it was a whole lot, well, then I'd be concerned and maybe have to alter my garment, but just a little bit like that, that's not a problem at all. So this is my sleeve sewn on. This is my underarm here. You can see my seam allowance is going opposite ways. I am actually up here on the sleeve head. I'm allowing my seam allowance to stay out towards the sleeve. I like the shaping that that gives the top of my sleeve head. I don't even know what they want on their instructions. What do they want? Yeah, in the instructions they say the same thing, to turn the seam towards the sleeve. So we're on the same page here, so that's good. So anyway, I wanted to show you how all that turned out. Everything eased in fine. I don't really see any problems, so I'm going to do the other sleeve exactly the same way. Okay, so to hem these sleeves, they're meant to be rolled up, and so they're giving us a huge facing type cuff in the inside. So way up here on the pattern, which is, I believe it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 6 3/8 inches. That's where my fold line is going to be. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw that fold line on here so I don't have to guess. Okay, so here's my fold line. So what I need to do is come in here to the very edge, open this up, and I'm going to fold it over about 1/4 inch. Okay, just fold my raw edge down about 1/4 inch like this, and then I'm going to press it so that it doesn't want to flip open. But come back and just edge stitch it, maybe about 1/8 of an inch in all the way around, and that's going to hold it. Alright, so I have my raw edge stitched down, and I have folded it up. Right here is that fold line that I marked on. It's on the inside so you can't see it. So what I'm going to do now is up here around this edge, just try to do a slightly invisible type of hand stitch just to catch those threads and keep it up there. And I think the point of that is so that when you roll up your sleeve, you don't see seam allowances here. So I've got my little sleeve here. I've got that hem just close to invisibly stitched in. And I realized that for my underarm seam, I did not come back and reinforce it. So before I leave this side of my outfit, I'm going to come back and put a second row of stitching just in the underarm area, that bottom arc area, just on the inside. And then I'm going to, because this is a very tight curve right here, so basically, they usually either want you to clip it or trim it down some. After I do my second row of stitching, I'm actually going to trim a little bit off with my pinking shears just to give my arm a little more flexibility down there. But I wanted to point out that yes, I did forget to do my second row of stitching, but I will do it right now. Alrighty, so I got my sleeves done and just kind of folded it up. I may have to put a little tack or a button or something just to keep it wanting to stay folded. But right now, just folding them up. And an optional step is to top stitch around the top and around the outside of this facing. So, I have to tell you, I'm having a big internal struggle right now because there's a side of me who wants to put bright turquoise blue rickrack on this so badly. You know, making it a 1960s meets Miami Vice kind of bathing suit cover-up. I'm fighting it for right now. I'm just going to top stitch it normally, but that might be fun. I don't know. Am I crazy? Let me know if I'm crazy. For right now, I'm just going to top stitch it. So I think that'll help reinforce this edge, if anything. And I'll probably do it about 1/8 of an inch in, and it's going to be all the way around the front and the back, up here and down here. All right, while I was over at the sewing machine top stitching, and I did do that, you know, it's top stitched now. I went ahead because the next step and the final step is, well, almost the final, I guess, is to hem the bottom. And what they want you to do is similar to the sleeve where you just turn the raw edge under about 1/4 inch and then just stitch at the edge. And they want you to have a bottom hem of 1.5 inches according to the pattern. I'm assuming that that 1.5 inches includes this bit, which to me means that my turned up area is about just over 1 inch. And that's what I've got here. I have about 1 1/8 inches. And so that's what I am going to pin all the way around. And I'm kind of torn because when I was turning it up and sewing it, it is on a curve and it is that fabric, and so I have a curve that is, you know, stretched out, and usually I like to crimp it or something like that so that I can turn it up really nicely, but I didn't do that because I was following their directions. And so what that means is as I bring it in, the very bottom edge is going to be slightly larger than the very top edge. So I'll just have to very carefully, I might just get my steam iron. Once I have a few points set, I'll just get my steam iron and try to shrink it down, pat it in, and make it fit. Well, I ironed it and I got it pressed down and eased in as well as I can. But I did not want to top stitch it. I didn't want to just run those stitches down. I'm just afraid that it's going to get wonky on me. So I am coming back and doing it by hand, and you know, it doesn't show up very much that way, just a couple little pricks. And I'm just going to take my time, work my way around. Well, here she is. She's very pink, very flowy, very cool. Now this sleeve I have long, and I might leave them longer. I like my arms covered up from the sun a little bit more than if it's filled up. This is the big pocket. I did hand sew the hem. I just think that that looks a little bit better. You can see the back, it's very drapey. Kind of cut on the cheek there. There you go, nice and drapey. So this one I have folded up, and I think that that is how they have it in their pattern drawing, you know, with the folded up sleeves. But all in all, I'm happy with it. It is just a basic flowy, blousey cover up, but I think it's cute. So I am not going to be posing with this on until after I get the bikini part done. So we're just going to call this good for right now, and I will see you in part 2.